Welcome back to ABC General Hospital Spoilers channel. Today, we will learn about the explosive situation developing around Martin Gray and a potential recording that could completely change the game for several Port Charles residents. The stakes have never been higher, as Martin may have accidentally stumbled upon information that could bring down both Tracy Quartermaine and Michael Corinthos in spectacular fashion. This developing storyline promises to deliver the kind of dramatic twists that General Hospital fans have been craving. Tracy's aggressive demands. The December 16th episode witnessed Tracy Quartermaine in full force as she made her intentions crystal clear regarding the Quartermaine family heirlooms. Tracy has always been protective of her family's legacy and treasured possessions, and she was not about to let Drew Cain keep items that rightfully belong to the Quartermaine estate. Her confrontation with Martin Gray was nothing short of intimidating, as she laid out her ultimatum with the precision of a seasoned businesswoman who knows exactly how to get what she wants. Tracy's approach was calculated and ruthless. She instructed Martin to use whatever means necessary to persuade Drew to return the heirlooms that he currently possesses. The intensity of her demand left no room for negotiation or delay. Tracy made it abundantly clear that failure was not an option, and she backed up her words with a threat that would make anyone think twice about crossing her. She warned Martin that if he didn't deliver results, she would personally ensure that he found himself behind bars due to his involvement in the will fraud scandal that has been hanging over his head like a dark cloud. The will fraud situation has been a ticking time bomb for Martin, and Tracy knows exactly where his vulnerabilities lie. She's leveraging this knowledge with the skill of someone who has spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of Port Charles politics and power plays. Martin understood immediately that Tracy wasn't bluffing. Her connections and influence in Port Charles could indeed make his life extremely difficult if she decided to follow through on her threats. The tense exchange between Martin and Drew. Following Tracy's demands, Martin wasted no time reaching out to Drew Cain. The conversation between these two men was loaded with tension and underlying currents of mutual manipulation. Martin approached the situation carefully, warning Drew that they needed to handle Tracy's demands strategically to prevent her from creating a massive public scene during the upcoming trial. The last thing either of them needed was Tracy making a spectacle that could damage their reputations and complicate an already precarious legal situation. However, Drew demonstrated that he wasn't simply going to roll over and comply with Tracy's demands without getting something in return. He remained firm in his position and made it clear that he had his own agenda. Drew told Martin that he needed assistance with something while Martin was at the Quartermaine estate. The show deliberately left viewers hanging regarding what exactly Drew requested, but the cryptic nature of this exchange suggested that something significant was being set in motion. This mysterious request from Drew appeared to be laying the groundwork for an elaborate scheme. The writers are building suspense by withholding the specific details of what Drew asked Martin to do. Whatever it was, it required Martin's presence at the Quartermaine mansion and set the stage for the spy games that would unfold. The tension between these characters is palpable, with each trying to outmaneuver the other while simultaneously needing to work together to deal with Tracy's threats. The eavesdropping discovery. The plot thickened considerably when it became apparent that someone had been lurking around the Quartermaine estate, listening in on private conversations. This someone managed to overhear a critical discussion between Tracy and Michael Corinthos that contained potentially explosive information. During their conversation, Tracy confirmed something absolutely damaging to Michael's credibility. She revealed that she had seen Michael outside Drew's house just moments before she discovered Drew injured inside the residence. This revelation is massive because it directly places Michael at the scene of Drew's attack. The timing Tracy described makes Michael look extremely suspicious and could completely undermine his version of events. If this information becomes public knowledge, Michael's entire defense strategy could crumble. The implications are staggering, not just for Michael personally, but for his family, his business interests, and his custody battle over his children. Given that Martin had been lingering around the Quartermain property specifically to help Drew with his mysterious request, all signs point to Martin being the person who struck gold by overhearing this conversation. Martin was in the right place at the right time, and he may have just acquired the most valuable piece of information in this entire tangled web of accusations and counter-accusations. The question now becomes what Martin will do with this knowledge and whether he has the proof to back up what he heard. Martin's potential recording evidence. Here's where the situation becomes even more intriguing. If Martin was indeed the eavesdropper who overheard Tracy and Michael's conversation, there's a strong possibility that he didn't just rely on his memory. Martin is an experienced attorney who understands the value of solid evidence. It's entirely plausible that he recorded their entire conversation on his cell phone. Given that he was close enough to hear every word clearly, his phone would have been well within range to capture their voices and the incriminating details Tracy shared. The show made a point of showing Martin with his phone in his hand during this time frame. This wasn't accidental. The writers are dropping breadcrumbs for viewers to follow. With his phone readily accessible, it would have been incredibly easy for Martin to simply press a few buttons and start recording once he realized he was overhearing something significant. Any competent lawyer would recognize immediately that what he was hearing could be crucial evidence, and Martin is nothing if not competent. Recording the conversation would be the logical move for someone in Martin's position. Without concrete evidence of what he overheard, Martin's claims could easily be dismissed as fabrications designed to create trouble for Tracy and support Drew's narrative. People could accuse him of lying or exaggerating to protect his client and himself. But with an actual recording, Martin would have irrefutable proof of exactly what was said. The conversation would speak for itself, and no amount of denial or spin could change what's captured on that recording. Strategic uses for the recording. If Martin does possess this recording, he now holds an incredibly powerful card that he can play in multiple ways. The strategic possibilities are endless, and each option comes with its own set of risks and potential rewards. Martin finds himself in a position where he can potentially solve his own legal problems while simultaneously helping Drew and possibly even extracting revenge on Tracy for threatening him. One obvious avenue would be blackmail. Martin desperately needs a way to avoid facing fraud charges that Tracy has threatened him with. He could approach Tracy and Michael with the recording and make it clear that if they don't back off and drop their pursuit of him, he'll expose what he knows. This would give Martin significant leverage over both of them. Tracy values her reputation and family name above almost everything, and Michael has everything to lose if evidence emerges placing him at the scene of Drew's assault. The blackmail scenario could play out in several ways. Martin might demand that Tracy withdraw her threats about the wolf fraud case and leave him alone. He could insist that Michael drop any plans to testify against Drew or change his story to be more favorable to Drew's defense. The beauty of having this recording is that it gives Martin options and power in a situation where he previously felt cornered and vulnerable. The perjury trap. There's another strategic angle that Martin might consider that could be even more devastating for Tracy and Michael. Brooklyn Quartermain made an interesting observation, suggesting that Martin might need to get creative to convince Drew to return the family heirlooms. One particularly cunning approach would be for Martin to hold onto his recorded evidence until after Tracy and Michael have committed perjury on the witness stand. If Martin waits until they've already testified under oath and their testimony contradicts what's on his recording, the legal consequences become exponentially more severe. Perjury is a serious crime that could result in criminal charges, fines, and even jail time. By allowing them to dig themselves into a deeper hole before revealing his evidence, Martin would maximize the weight and impact of his recording. Their credibility would be completely destroyed, and they would face legal jeopardy far beyond the current situation. This strategy would require patience and careful timing on Martin's part. He would need to resist the temptation to use his leverage immediately and instead play the long game. However, the payoff could be substantial. Not only would the perjury charges give him even more power over Tracy and Michael, but it would also strengthen Drew's position considerably in any legal proceedings. The prosecution's case could fall apart if key witnesses are exposed as liars who committed perjury, trading the evidence for cooperation. Alternatively, Martin could choose a more collaborative approach by using the recording as a bargaining chip with Drew. He could offer to exchange the recorded evidence in return for Drew's cooperation regarding the heirloom situation. This would solve Tracy's immediate concern about getting the family treasures back, while also providing Drew with powerful ammunition he can use in his own defense. However, this approach carries its own inherent risks that Martin would need to carefully consider. Even if Martin tries to maintain his innocence and present himself as simply facilitating a resolution between parties, Tracy is far too intelligent and experienced not to connect the dots. She would quickly realize that Martin had been on the Quartermain property recently and would logically conclude that he was the source of this information leak. Tracy's sharp mind and decades of experience dealing with corporate espionage and family betrayals mean she would immediately become suspicious of Martin. She would know that he was in the perfect position to overhear private conversations and that he had both the motive and opportunity to record what he heard. Even if Martin attempts to distance himself from how the recording came to light, Tracy would see through any subterfuge and would likely target him for revenge. Tracy's potential retaliation. This brings us to a critical problem for Martin. Even if he successfully uses the recording to achieve his immediate goals, Tracy could still pursue legal action against him for the will fraud. Tracy Quartermain is not someone who forgives easily, and she certainly doesn't forget when someone has crossed her or threatened her family's interests. If everything unravels and the recording becomes public knowledge, Tracy would have every reason to come after Martin with everything she has. Tracy has the resources, connections, and determination to make Martin's life extremely difficult. She could push for prosecution on the fraud charges, use her influence to damage his legal practice and reputation, and make sure he pays a price for his role in this entire situation. Martin needs to think very carefully about the long-term consequences of his actions and whether the short-term benefits of using the recording are worth the potential backlash from someone as powerful and vindictive as Tracy Quartermain. The will fraud case represents a genuine threat to Martin's freedom and career. Even if he manages to navigate the current crisis successfully, having Tracy as an enemy could haunt him for years to come. She has a long memory and has proven time and again that she's willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike back at those who have wronged her. Martin's moral considerations. Adding another layer of complexity to Martin's decision-making process is his genuine affection for Willow Kane. Martin has shown that he truly cares about Willow's well-being and happiness, which wasn't initially part of his plan. This emotional connection has created an internal conflict for Martin because he may now suspect that Michael is actually guilty of attacking Drew. If Martin believes that Michael is responsible for Drew's injuries, he faces a moral dilemma about what to do with his evidence. On one hand, protecting himself and his client Drew seems like the obvious choice. On the other hand, if he has evidence that could prove Michael's guilt, doesn't he have an obligation to ensure justice is served? His feelings for Willow complicate matters further because exposing Michael would hurt Willow tremendously, even if Michael deserves to face consequences for his actions. This internal struggle makes Martin's character more three-dimensional and interesting. He's not simply a scheming lawyer looking out for his own interests. He's someone who has developed genuine relationships and emotional investments that make his choices more difficult and meaningful. The recording represents power, but using that power could damage someone he cares about deeply. Multiple paths forward. Given all these competing interests and considerations, Martin has several possible paths he could take with this potential recording. He could deliver the evidence to Drew directly, allowing his client to decide how best to use it in his defense strategy. He could approach Alexis Davis, a respected attorney and former friend, and ask for her counsel on how to handle this ethically and legally. He might even consider going directly to the authorities and letting the justice system handle the information impartially. Each of these options would have different outcomes and implications for everyone involved. Giving the recording to Drew puts the power in his hands, but might make Martin more complicit in whatever happens next. Consulting with Alexis could provide moral cover and legal protection, but might limit Martin's ability to use the evidence to protect himself. Going to the authorities would be the most transparent approach, but could backfire if Tracy follows through on her threats about the will fraud. The tension and uncertainty surrounding what Martin will ultimately decide makes this storyline compelling. Viewers are left to speculate about which path he'll choose and what consequences will follow. The writers have set up a situation where there's no clear right answer, and any decision Martin makes will have significant repercussions. The coming storm. What's certain is that this eavesdropping revelation will create massive problems for both Tracy and Michael. The information Martin overheard, whether he recorded it or not, has the potential to blow up their carefully constructed narratives and expose truths they desperately want to keep hidden. Tracy's confirmation that she saw Michael at Drew's house at the crucial time is exactly the kind of evidence that could turn the entire case on its head. Michael has been working hard to maintain his innocence and present himself as a victim of circumstances. If it becomes known that Tracy placed him at the scene, his credibility will be shattered. The custody implications alone could be devastating, as judges tend to frown upon parents who might be involved in violent criminal activity. His business relationships could suffer, and his standing in the community would take a serious hit. For Tracy, the situation is equally precarious. If it comes out that she possessed this information and failed to disclose it properly, or worse, if she's suspected of helping Michael cover up his involvement, her reputation would be damaged. The quartermain name that she's fought so hard to protect and elevate could be dragged through the mud in a very public scandal. The stage is set for explosive confrontations and shocking revelations in the coming episodes. Martin Gray holds the key to potentially destroying or saving multiple lives with whatever evidence he may have collected. Whether he chooses to use it for personal gain, moral purposes, or strategic advantage remains to be seen. What we know for certain is that trouble is brewing, and when the truth finally comes out, the fallout will be spectacular. NEXT, we will learn about the issue that has been sending shockwaves through Port Charles and leaving longtime viewers absolutely stunned. The mystery surrounding Caesar Fazen's potential return has taken an unexpectedly dark and technological twist that nobody saw coming, and the implications are absolutely chilling for everyone involved. The mysterious gift behind bars. The latest developments began in the most unlikely of places, Anna Devane's prison cell, which has been transformed into something resembling a comfortable apartment thanks to various accommodations. It was there that Anna received an unexpected package that would set off a chain reaction of revelations. The package contained a copy of The Crystalline Conspiracy, a novel penned by none other than the infamous Caesar Fazen himself, writing under his pseudonym P.K. Sinclair. What made this delivery particularly unsettling wasn't just the book itself, but the handwritten inscription it contained. The note was addressed to his muse, signed with nothing more than a simple C, a signature that carried the weight of years of obsession and twisted devotion. Under normal circumstances, receiving such a package from a deceased villain would be interpreted as a threatening message from beyond the grave, perhaps orchestrated by one of his loyalists or someone seeking to torment Anna with memories of her complicated past with Fazen. However, the context surrounding this delivery painted an entirely different picture. Rather than feeling like an act of intimidation or psychological warfare, the book's arrival seemed to carry a different purpose altogether. It felt like validation, like confirmation of something Anna had perhaps been suspecting but hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. The timing of this delivery would prove to be far from coincidental, as viewers would soon discover. Connecting the scattered pieces. The significance of Anna receiving Fazen's novel became exponentially more profound when considered alongside other seemingly unrelated conversations happening simultaneously in Port Charles. Jack Brennan, in what appeared to be casual conversation with Lulu Spencer, made an offhand mention of Nathan West's last name, specifically pointing out that his legal surname is actually Faison, though he went by Westburn, or simply West for brevity and personal preference. For those who might have forgotten the complicated family dynamics, Nathan is the biological son of Caesar Faison and Madeline Reeves, making him Peter August's half-brother through their shared father. This seemingly innocuous reminder about Nathan's true surname suddenly transformed all the scattered clues from previous months into a cohesive and deeply troubling pattern. What had previously seemed like random plot threads and disconnected story elements were now aligning in a way that suggested something far more sinister was at play. The show's writers had been methodically laying groundwork, dropping breadcrumbs that only now were revealing their true significance. The mention of Peter August, also known by his birth name Heinrich Faison, being confirmed dead was particularly important because it eliminated one obvious suspect from the equation. With Peter definitively out of the picture, the narrative was forced to shift its focus elsewhere. A new kind of survival. The revelation that Peter August is truly deceased and not returning was crucial because it fundamentally changed the nature of the story being told. This wasn't going to be another tired tale of a villain's son seeking revenge for his father's death or attempting to complete his father's unfinished business. The narrative the show was constructing pointed towards something far colder, far more calculated, and infinitely more disturbing than simple familial vengeance. Instead of resurrection or legacy continuation through bloodline, the story seemed to be exploring the concept of preservation, the actual preservation of Faison's consciousness itself. This shift in focus brought new meaning to an earlier scene that many viewers might have dismissed or forgotten. Several episodes back, viewers were briefly shown an image of a human brain displayed on a computer screen in Henry Dalton's laboratory. At the time, this visual seemed like typical soap opera science fiction theatrics, the kind of futuristic set dressing that adds atmosphere without necessarily meaning anything concrete. However, with these new revelations, that image of the brain takes on foundational importance. It wasn't just set decoration or atmospheric mood setting, it was a critical clue about the actual mechanism through which Faison's influence might persist in Port Charles. Nathan's convenient return. Nathan West's return to Port Charles after 7 years of absence has been remarkably smooth, perhaps too smooth for comfort. His reintegration into the community, his relationships, and his former life has proceeded with an ease that should have raised more red flags than it did. The character has shown surprisingly little curiosity about the events that transpired during his lengthy absence, displaying minimal interest in investigating the circumstances of his supposed death or the years he lost. For someone who was presumed dead and has now miraculously returned, his lack of questions and apparent contentment with vague explanations should be setting off alarm bells. This latest episode reframed Nathan's return entirely, transforming what seemed like convenient storytelling into something potentially sinister. 7 years is an extraordinarily long time to be missing, yet Nathan slipped back into Port Charles' life as though he'd merely been away on an extended vacation. The instant trust he received from friends and family, the lack of thorough investigation into his whereabouts during those missing years, the absence of any real psychological trauma from his ordeal, none of these elements were treated as the warning signs they should have been. Everyone in Port Charles was simply so relieved to have Nathan back that they stopped asking the difficult questions that desperately needed answers. Jack Brennan's calculated observations. What made Jack Brennan's observations particularly effective was their understated delivery. He wasn't making dramatic accusations or pointing fingers with theatrical flair. Instead, he was simply stating facts, presenting observations that should have been obvious to everyone, but somehow weren't. His approach was methodical and factual, which paradoxically made his implications far more unsettling than if he'd been overtly dramatic about them. Jack wasn't accusing Nathan of any specific wrongdoing that could be proven in a court of law. He was merely highlighting inconsistencies, noting that the timeline didn't quite add up, and observing that everyone had been remarkably quick to stop questioning and simply accept Nathan's presence without demanding a complete accounting of his past. The restraint shown in how this information was presented demonstrated sophisticated storytelling. By having Jack present these observations as logical concerns rather than emotional accusations, the show created a sense of creeping dread that was far more effective than any shock reveal could have been. The audience was invited to connect the dots themselves, to realize that something was fundamentally wrong with Nathan's return, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on exactly what that something was. The digital ghost theory. If we accept the premise that Faison's consciousness has somehow persisted beyond his physical death, then the critical question shifts dramatically. It's no longer about where Faison's mind might be located or how it survived. Those questions have essentially been answered through the clues about consciousness transfer and digital preservation. The real question, the one that should be keeping everyone in Port Charles awake at night, is this: who has been harboring Faison's consciousness, and are they even aware of it? The evidence increasingly points toward Nathan as an unwitting host, someone who is carrying Faison's consciousness without having any knowledge of this fact. This would make Nathan not a villain or a co-conspirator, but rather a victim, perhaps the ultimate victim of his father's twisted schemes. He wouldn't be complicit in whatever plan Faison had set in motion. Instead, he would be an innocent vessel, a human time bomb that could detonate at any moment without warning. The thought of Nathan unknowingly carrying his father's consciousness is deeply disturbing on multiple levels, transforming him from a returning hero into a potential threat through no fault of his own. The memory mapping connection. General Hospital has explored the concept of memory mapping and consciousness transfer in previous storylines, establishing that such technology exists within this fictional universe. This prior groundwork means the show doesn't need to spend time explaining how such a thing would be possible. That foundation has already been laid. Nathan could very well be functioning as a sleeper agent, completely unaware that he's been programmed with his father's memories, knowledge, and perhaps even personality traits that could activate under specific conditions or at predetermined times. The psychological horror of this scenario cannot be overstated. Imagine living your life, believing yourself to be in complete control of your thoughts and actions, only to discover that you've been harboring someone else's consciousness, particularly when that someone is your own villainous father. The potential for this revelation to destroy Nathan's sense of self, his relationships, and his entire identity is staggering. And if Faison's consciousness does activate within Nathan, what happens to Nathan's own personality? Does it get suppressed? Overwritten? Does Nathan remain aware, but trapped inside his own mind, forced to watch as his body carries out his father's plans? A legacy without physical presence. This entire scenario serves as a chilling reminder of just how formidable and forward-thinking Caesar Faison truly was as a villain. He didn't need to be physically resurrected to continue exerting his influence over Port Charles. He didn't need a loyal son to carry on his work or avenge his death. Instead, Faison created something far more insidious, a method by which he could continue existing and pursuing his goals without ever needing a body of his own. All he required was a suitable host, a conduit through which his consciousness could operate. And who better to serve that purpose than his own son? Someone whose DNA and biological connection might make the consciousness transfer more stable and successful. The genius and horror of Faison's plan lies in its patience and its layers of protection. By using Nathan as his host, Faison ensured that no one would suspect the truth because Nathan himself is innocent and unaware. There's no deception on Nathan's part to detect, no lies to uncover, no suspicious behavior to investigate. Nathan genuinely believes he is simply Nathan, which makes him the perfect cover for whatever Faison has planned. And because Nathan is beloved by the Port Charles community, because he has genuine relationships and history with people who care about him. Anyone who starts asking too many questions or expressing suspicions about Nathan's return will be viewed as paranoid or cruel, accused of being unable to accept the miracle of his survival. The implications of Faison's potential survival through digital consciousness transfer extend far beyond just Nathan and his immediate circle. If such technology exists and has been successfully implemented, What's to stop Faison or others from using it again? Could there be multiple hosts out there, each carrying fragments of Faison's consciousness or the consciousness of other villains? The Pandora's box that this storyline has opened presents endless possibilities for future plot developments, all of them equally terrifying in their implications for the residents of Port Charles. The age-old question of what makes us human, what constitutes identity, and whether consciousness can truly exist independent of the body has been brought into sharp focus. And the answers that General Hospital seems to be suggesting are deeply unsettling for everyone involved.